For the first part of your life, you're figuring out who you are. Society tells you you're something, but then one day, and you know there's undercurrents in you. You know that you're made for something, and you kind of, strip off the layers of what the world says you are and what the world says you should be, and it's kind of like your labyrinth story, because that's the journey. It's a metaphorical journey. You're going in, and your first half of your life, and then you come out and you are somebody new. And then you're on he calls that the hero's journey of figuring out who you are. And then the second part is the artist's journey, and that's really fulfilling what you were destined to become. And I'm on the second half of that now, and it took me a long time to get through the hero's journey just to articulate, who I am and what I'm about and what I stand for.
Welcome to the Power Plant Body podcast. My name is Taylor, and this show is focused on self-development. I've found in my own life, as well as the lives of my clients that I've worked with, that it's human nature to focus on goals in one area of life, or maybe two areas of life if you're lucky, to the detriment of the other areas of your life. For this reason, there's a tool that I use with my clients called the Goal Wheel that is specifically designed to shed light on how you might be preventing yourself from living the fullest life possible. In a nutshell, the goal wheel is a circle drawn on a piece of paper that's being divided into 8 quadrants. The 8 quadrants are family and friends, romance, fun and recreation, health and fitness, finances, personal growth and spirituality, career, and physical environment. Basically, you give yourself a score between 1 and 10 for each of these areas of your life, and that allows you to see where you're excelling and putting your attention. But it also shows you the areas of your life that you're currently neglecting. The areas of life that we neglect are often the areas that we need to work on the most. And that's exactly why I started this podcast, to share insights from teachers who are experts in one or more of these areas of the goal wheel. Each interview is meant to inspire you to take action in one of those areas so that you can live a more fulfilled and balanced life. To get your hands on a free copy of the Goal Wheel PDF so that you can use it to create meaningful goals and take steps to achieve them, head over to powerplantbody.com/free-tools. You'll find a bunch of other free tools and resources there as well. My guest today is Jay Millar. Jay is the owner of My Virtual Dad, where he mentors and coaches men to become the husband, father, and provider that they've always wanted to be. It's unfortunate, but most men go through their youth and adolescence without a positive father figure. So many men are denied the meaningful relationship a boy is meant to have with his father so that he can be taught how to be a confident, loving, and generative man. Some fathers spend all of their time at work, some fathers disconnect from their family altogether even when they are at home, and some fathers leave their children entirely. Jay discovered men's work many, many years ago, and through it uncovered his purpose: to serve men through mentorship and guidance so that they can better navigate the often churning waters of being a modern-day man. Jay has known the trials, the patience, and the love it takes to commit to becoming the best father, husband, and provider he can be. He also recognizes how his youth and his experience with his father figures shaped the path for his challenges that he'd face along the journey to becoming the best man that he could be. Jay is now bringing his gifts of knowledge and experience back to the community of men who could most benefit from it so that they can be the best husbands, fathers, and providers that they can be. I thoroughly enjoyed my conversation with Jay, and I know that you will too. So without any further delay, I bring you my conversation with Jay Millar. Great. Well, Jay, I appreciate you being on the podcast. I'm looking forward to learning more about you and what you do. And what you do, the little that I know about what you do, is very near and dear to my heart with men's work and all that. But before we get started, I thought maybe you could just use the next 5-10 minutes to let us know a little bit more about who you are, what you do, and why you do it.
All right. Well, thanks for having me on, Taylor. It's great to be here. I've had a lot of fun listening to your other podcasts. So I think I'm officially the least fit guest you've ever had on a podcast. I do work out, but I do enjoy working out. But you've got some people that are really world class that you've had as guests. So happy to be here, humbled to be here. So just a little bit about me. My name's Jay Millar. I was born and raised in Colorado. I still live here. I'm a native, been over 50 years now, and grew up in a home Well, right now I've got a wife and three boys in their 20s, 24, 22, and 20. Wow. Two of them are still in college. One of them's married and on his way. He's moving down the road with a lot of confidence and peace in life. He's got a plan and he's moving along. So very blessed and fortunate. Got a great current family life. Have a job that I love. I've been in technology sales for 25 years. But what I think we're here to talk about more is what I'll call my passion project, and it's what I do because it means so much to me, and it's something that I've fostered over a number of years, and now it's really starting to take shape. And the background behind it is I saw three forces really combining. One was my own personal story, my own personal background, and I grew up in a home filled with domestic violence and alcoholism. My parents divorced when I was age 10. And this is back in the 70s. This is when it was taboo to talk about those things. So we kept it quiet, and I was kind of filled with shame. And so I had a really more intense upbringing until I was 10. And then there's a term now that I've discovered. There's a lot of studies on men and boys, and that's where my heart is, to help other men and boys. But I had some dad deprivation. I had a gap. I didn't have a father speaking into my life. I had a very loving stepfather that filled in. He was good to me. He loved me, but he was on his own journey. He had a lot of things he was figuring out as well on his own. So he didn't really speak intentionally into my life. So that's number one. And then number two, when I was 21 years old, and I feel really, really fortunate, Taylor. I'm much older than you. This is before YouTube and social media. If I hadn't seen this clip, it changed my life. And I saw it just during like halftime of a college football game. And it was Lou Holtz, who was then head football coach of the University of Notre Dame. He said something that changed my life. He said, there's only three things that will change you from where you're at today to where you're going to be 5 years from now. And that's the books you read, the people you meet, and the dreams you dream. And I love that. I internalized that to mean, okay, I'm trying to be a good husband, father, provider ultimately in my life. I want to create a life exactly the opposite of that in which I grew up, but I have no idea. I don't know what a good relationship looks like. Yeah. I don't know how to manage a career. I was the first one in my bloodline to get a college education. I had some cousins and some things that got degrees, but I was the first one to get a college education. I joined the military to pay for college. And I'm figuring, how do I run finances? We had a lot of money drama. My mother's, she always struggled with money and filed for bankruptcy multiple times. So just all these things, I'm like, how am I going to figure this out? So that Lou Holtz quote was the second thing. And again, that led me to say, okay, I want to be intentional about personal development, about seeking good quality mentors, not just one. I created a tapestry of mentors, somebody who was good in business, or somebody who was running their family well, or somebody fitness wise, somebody like you, who was really, trying to keep their body, running and functional and happy and productive. And, so I got a bunch of mentors. But then on the flip side of that, I also wanted to help those. I've had a heart for those who are seeking help too. So that was the second thing. That was the second force. And the third force is men, I believe, and this is more recently over the past 4 or 5 years, I think, Taylor, men are in danger. And it's not something we talk about a lot, but, the statistics just really reveal the need. Men today, and I'm talking more U.S.-centric, but it is also global, 5 times more likely to commit suicide, 6 times more likely to live in poverty, 9 times more likely to drop out of school, 10 times more likely to have a substance abuse problem. That men die more than women in 9 of the top 10 leading causes of death, which draws me to what you're trying to do is a healthy lifestyle. There's a lot of these things are chronic and underlying, and you're an elixir for that. You and your mission in life really help people with many of those things. But I think men are in grave danger, and we need to talk about it more. And we need to create. I love women's programs. I love women's empowerment. We need more of the best people, men, women, no matter what your race, color, whatever. We need all people to be at their best. I firmly believe that in my heart. So I just want to reach out to men who are looking and they're seeking and they're trying to figure out how to be a better husband, father, and provider. And that's what's drawn me to you. And I love your goal wheel because it does take a broader look at, hey, there's different elements to life that you need to do some self-care in, and how you're doing with those.
Yeah, I love that. There's so much in there, and I want to make sure that we cover we cover everything, because it's there's something that jumped right out to me is you have that 3-pillar approach. But what incited that 3-pillar approach was those 3 pillars from that quote. You said it was the people. If you want to achieve something in the next 5 years, what was the quote exactly?
Lou Holtz, and he said, actually, there's this guy Charlie Tremendous Jones who he borrowed it from. He said, there's only 3 things that will change your life from where you're at today to where you'll be 5 years from now, and it's the books you read, the people you meet, and the dreams you dream.
I love it. That the people that you meet, you mentioned. You talked about the goal wheel and all these different quadrants to the goal wheel, which is what this podcast is primarily centered around. And you talked about having a tapestry of mentors in what sounded like each of those areas of the goal wheel. When you were growing up, you didn't have YouTube, you didn't have the things that we take for granted today to learn what we can learn at our fingertips. But you sought out mentors, you sought out people who could teach you. And it sounds like your website is myvirtualdad.net. It sounds like you're looking for a way, or you're fulfilling a role that a lot of men, or a lot of boys don't have as they're growing up, the mentorship in these personal development areas of their life. Is that fair?
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah.
That's
How
fair.
does that show up? I'm trying
to fill that gap a little bit of I guess I'll take in what I've been trying to help men with primarily. There's 40 to 50 books and thousands of conversations with other men that are likely not documented. I have some journal entries, but just trying to curate that list into something that So if you walk into a Barnes and Noble, or you log into Amazon.com and you're like, hey, I want to be a better man. There's thousands and millions of options that you could look at. So I try to just give kind of a starter pack, if you will, Taylor.
Yeah, I love that. The thing that you provide that I feel you can't get in a book, no man can get in a book, is that mentorship, right? The personal guidance. The thing that I'm always reminded of is a book that I read. It's called, I think it's called From Boys to Men, but it's not the band. And there's another book called From Boys to Men. But the thing that struck me so the main thing that I took away from that book is you think about a labyrinth and you think about a maze. And as long as human history has been around, men like yourself, the mentors of the tribe would take boys through the initiation of going in through the labyrinth. And a labyrinth was only one way in and one way out. You went to the center, you found peace, and you went in a boy, you went through the trials and tribulations as a boy, and you came back out a man. And today, boys don't have father figures, so they don't have the mentors that would help guide them through that labyrinth. So what used to be a labyrinth is now a maze. We kind of throw them in there and they're left to their own devices to find their own way out. When you going through all the things that you've gone through from a boy and learning all the things that you've learned, finding your way and becoming the man who's now bringing this back and offering your mentorship to men who need it, what have you seen is what are men looking for in that mentorship? What are they? What's the guidance that you're providing?
And it's again much like your goal wheel. I've got modules on different things. One of the things I talk about is and part of it I put into words of things I wish my dad had told me, right? And now being a father of 3 boys. And when I turned 50, I had a bit of a seminal moment. I'm like, hey, if I could go back and talk to 20-year-old Jay, what would I tell him, right? And then I'm like, oh, by the way, I happen to have a son who's 20 years old right now. So instead of making it, an academic exercise, let's make it a practical exercise. Yeah. And so that's part of my journey. As I started saying, sharing these things with my boys, and here's the thing. Here's an example of one. It's like kind of 4 things that men I think should should really work on or understand with their mate before they get married, right? You know, how can you try to figure out if there's going to be success there or not? And the four things are, you know, make sure you're aligned on finances. That's on your goal wheel, right? And that's the biggest thing that marital couples fight about is finances. So it's critical to make sure that you're on the same page. I'm a big Dave Ramsey fan. So for finance, I think he kind of can help people get out of the ditch of debt. But more importantly, he can help you prevent it if you know about it. When you know, every kid going into college is prey. Credit card companies are, you know, hey, you can get a $2,000 credit card. You don't need anything. And people immediately get into debt, not to mention college debt a lot of times. So one, if you're going to get married, make sure you're on the same page on finances. Have intentional conversations about it. Have some structured conversation about it. Number two is family, right? Do you want to have a family or not? And you can unpack that in a lot of ways, right? You can have timing, you can have size, you can, you know, adoption, foster, or whatever. You know, what are you going to do? How are you going to go about it? Is it important to you is the big idea.
Yeah.
And the next one is in-laws. You know, can you deal with the crazies? There's crazies in every family, right? And there's a lot of weight to that when you go into a holiday meal. Right? You're driving over and you're like, oh, this is thick, right? This is something heavy, right? And I'm looking, you know, so you've got to at least have that conversation on the in-laws. And the fourth one is faith, you know, and you know, faith to me means Christianity. I don't lead in my class with Christianity, but I'm unapologetic and I like to define why it's important to me and how I practice it. But it can be anything. I mean, I have some friends who've dug a pretty big ditch with substance abuse, and they believe in, you know, self-care and body care and staying, you know, Alcoholics Anonymous or some substance abuse program. They want to take care of themselves. It's kind of like the oxygen mask on the airplane. Their top priority is self-care. If I'm off the rails, I'm not going to be able to take care of my family, so I got to take care of myself. So. It could be saving the earth. It could be giving to the poor. It could be taking care of dogs. It could be whatever it is. I do believe for a man to live a full life, you have to believe in something bigger than yourself in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah, I believe that through and through as well. A sense of purpose, right? A sense of a reason to get up out of bed in the morning and progress on something that you went to sleep the night before building or working towards. I love that. So when you think about the state of, well, we could talk about masculinity, but just men in 2021, what are some of the biggest challenges you feel men are facing in their personal development and also how they contribute to the world around them as men? Yeah.
I'll kind of start with that second question first. I think back, and I'm rewinding, you know, just generically 150, 200 years, you know, men's purpose was to provide and to protect, right? And now provision is gray because there's more women in the workforce. And again, I'm not against that. I think women contribute a tremendous amount. But also families that want to have somebody caring for the family at home while somebody works. That's good. So provision is now more gray, and protection is more gray as well, right? There used to be it was wars, and you know, society would bestow upon you, hey, this is what your duty is to protect.
Yeah.
And now protection, and I have a newsletter as well, and I wrote about this. I think protection, you know. Nobody's ever broken into my house. I feel fortunate about that. I haven't really had, you know, we're on guard walking around at night and, you know, if we're downtown for a meal or in parking, you know, you want to protect. You physically get that desire to protect your spouse and your children. But that comes up so, you know, it doesn't come up often enough to really make an impact on a man. So I view my role is to guide, my purpose is to guide my boys. And it's actually to protect my wife from herself. And here's what I mean by that. She she has a lot of negative self-talk looking in the mirror, like, hey, boy, I just don't look like I think I should, or, I made a mistake parenting, I didn't do my best with the boys today, or, I should have made a meal and I didn't make a meal, we ate out, or, something like that. And society puts a lot of pressure on women. And I view my role now is to protect my wife from herself. She's strong, she's powerful, she's capable, she can hold her own in business meetings and PTAs, in the neighborhood, whatever. But I need to protect her from herself. So that's my purpose. It's not going off. And I had a number of friends who've been in the military since I was there as well. But, that physical protection, we've got to reframe that. And my mission is to help my boys find a purpose that isn't bestowed upon them by society. They've got to find a purpose of something that they're going to get out of bed for that's greater than themselves. So I think that's a big gap with men today, is they just don't have that natural purpose, and we've got to be intentional about finding it.
I get you. Yeah, in your conversations with men, in your work with men, how does one begin to find that purpose? How do you help them begin looking for it, and once they find it, begin putting themselves into it?
That's a really good, and that's a deep question. And I think, we're all on our own journey. My journey, it took me years and years just to articulate what I told you, growing up in a home like I did. And this is what happened to me, and this is how I'm responding to it. Every man's on a journey. Some men have fathers who are there, they're present. Sometimes they're too present. Their expectations are so high. I know a man, I know a couple of men who've been in professional levels of sports. I'm not going to mention the sports, but they still cannot satisfy their dad, because they'll never measure up. They're always trying to measure up. I know, unfortunately, too many men who've been molested, and they feel powerless, right? I know men who've, again, like me, kind of abandoned is the way I'd track my story. So in my 90-day boot camp, we talk about that first. We talk about, what is your story? What is your journey? What's the journey you're on? And really try to flip the switch and make that your superpower, right? Because, there's a guy, are you familiar with Stephen Pressfield, the author?
Oh, yeah.
Stephen's great.
Absolutely.
He writes this book, he talks about the hero's journey, and he kind of breaks it up into two nice, easy parts. He says, for the first part of your life, you're figuring out who you are. Society tells you you're something, but then one day, and there's undercurrents in you. You know that you're made for something, and you kind of, strip off the layers of what the world says you are and what the world says you should be, and it's kind of like your labyrinth story. That's why I like that, because that's the journey. It's a metaphorical journey. You're going in, and your first half of your life, and then you come out, and you are somebody new. And then you're on he calls that the hero's journey of figuring out who you are. And then the second part is the artist's journey, and that's really fulfilling what you were destined to become. And I'm on the second half of that now, and it took me a long time to get through the hero's journey just to articulate, who I am and what I'm about and what I stand for.
I love that. When you talk about the hero's journey, a big piece of that, well, you mentioned turning in your 90-day boot camp, turning what were previously challenges or weaknesses into your strengths. And you can see that coming full force in your own life, coming full circle through the hero's journey and bringing more of yourself to the work that you do, that sense of reciprocity to the world around you you mentioned when you were younger, not having the strong father figure in your life, and now fulfilling that role for a lot of men who don't have that in their life right now. When you think about the artist journey, how is that a deepening of that process of that giving back to the world around you? What does that look like?
I do think it is. It's a deepening. It's pressing into it. It's finding different ways. And here's an example of my artist journey. I mean, I started doing men's groups like 20 years ago. They were faith-based, but again, we didn't necessarily lead with faith. Sometimes we would study a book out of the Bible, but a lot of times we would we'd read Lone Survivor. We'd read a book about Spartans. We would we would just John Eldridge's Oh man, I forgot. I'm drawing a blank on his name. He just about a man's journey, and wanting to be a hero of his own story, and going into the wilderness and doing things, that make him feel like a man. So it did men's groups, and we studied a bunch of books. But then out of that, I started, people would want to meet in a coffee shop, just kind of like you and I are simulating talking in a coffee shop here. And we'd talk about certain things about life. I'm having trouble with my marriage here or my job. How can I get on track with my work, or my finances are in the dumps? And then about 5-6 years ago, my nephew reached out to me, and he had some dad deprivation as well. And we weren't particularly close at the time, but he's like, he was struggling, and he said, hey, I need some help. So we'd go to a coffee shop once a month and talk about things and work through some things. And then he's like, hey, my friend wants to join. Can he join? And then, hey, and another person wants to join. They should be hearing this. And out of that, I was like, hey, there's 10 or 12 things here that are common, right? So let's just start, kind of creating a very, very light curriculum, right? Hey, here's the biggest things you need to know. It kind of started like bullet points. Yeah. And then the pandemic hit. And that was a gift to me in the sense that I started broadcasting virtually, right? I mean, I call it my virtual dad, because I had to build a virtual dad through all these different pieces and parts and create the fatherly advice that I was hungry and thirsty for. But I went virtual and started broadcasting and meeting with men, and now we've got Zoom meetings, and I'll broadcast to a bigger group, and then they'll break out into smaller groups, and they'll simulate like they're sitting in a coffee shop talking. Since we couldn't get out there and do it, we were forced to figure out how to be creative with technology and do that. Because, teaching about finance, teaching about health, teaching about, faith, whatever, that's good. But I think that's 20% of it, Taylor. The 80% is you sitting down with another dude or a friend and going, hey, how do we make this real? How do I make it real? Who's going to hold me accountable for this, right?
Yeah.
That's so important for a man to have that connection, because men want to be connected, and we're terrible at it.
I didn't realize how important it was for men to be in a room working on each other, or working on themselves around other men who are working on themselves, and learning to trust men to be vulnerable about the things that are most challenging to them, until I stepped foot into a room like the one that you're talking about. A room around other men who are, you look around, you see all these guys. I remember there was actually a really quick short story. I was walking down the street one day, and there was this guy, and he was getting out of his like $150,000 Porsche, and he was like 6'4", and he was about my age at the time. I was in my late 20s, and he was just like a really good looking dude in probably like a $1,500 suit, getting out of a $150,000 Porsche, and he went around the other side, and he opened up the door for his just absolutely beautiful girlfriend or wife or whatever. And I looked at him, and I thought to myself, man, that guy's got it together. I wish I could be that guy, And I looked at him in that moment as just this guy who just reached the apex of what it meant to be a successful man in life. And then I got into men's work, and I was around men like that, and other men too, men across the spectrum. And I realized, by being in a room with other men who are willing to be vulnerable about their challenges that they're facing in their life, that guy getting out of his Porsche has just as many problems and just as many demons and just as many limiting beliefs from childhood that I have, or you have, or anybody else has. And he needs men the way that I need men to build that brotherhood and to help each other lift ourselves up and go through the work.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, but the stories we tell ourselves, I had a goofy, I did the same. Well, I used to do the same thing. And I had this look, probably for the first 40 years of my life, I thought if a guy had a nice car, he was successful. Right? Yeah. Now I look back, if only it were that easy, Taylor.
Yeah, exactly.
That would just make it perfect, right? But there's story after story of the person who focused too much on their career and lost their family. Or focus too much on the material things and and lost other things and didn't have relationships or didn't have health or whatever, right? Or were deep in debt. They couldn't even afford what they were pretending to afford, right?
Yeah.
So I love that vulnerability thing. And I think that's where it all begins. I've been deeply influenced by Brene Brown. I love her work. And leading with vulnerability, she says, vulnerability is the first step to leadership, right? And my first story, the first story I tell in one of my classes is, I call it Elvis and the Jockstrap, trying to be provocative. But it was the day Elvis died. I mean, I was 10 years old and I was getting ready to go to a basketball camp. I loved basketball. And like 2 days before, my mom, one of the required pieces of gear was a jockstrap. I was 10. I had testicles the size smaller than a walnut. I did not think that was a problem that needed fixing, right? Yeah. They didn't even move. Yeah. I didn't know what they were for. They hurt when they got crunched, but that's about all I knew. And so I get this jockstrap, and I don't know. My mom and dad were still married. My dad wasn't around, and my mom handed me the box, and I went to try it on. I come back and I put it on over my underwear. I was modest, and I come back in, and my mom starts laughing hilariously, and it's because I put the jockstrap on backwards. I put the supporting function like it was on the back. I didn't even, and she started laughing, and I think it's hilarious now, but actually over the years that was kind of the seed of resentment, kind of like, where were you, Dad? And I'm through the anger. My father passed away 25 years ago. He was pretty much an alcoholic until the day he died. He rode his body hard, put it up wet. We had a good relationship near the end. We were talking more, and I'm at peace with everything. And I think Tony Robbins said it. If I had the parents I wanted, I wouldn't be the man I am today. So I'm super peaceful with where I am, and I'm grateful. And it goes back to Stephen Pressfield's hero's journey. I embrace everything that has challenged me because it's making me who I am. Have I enjoyed it? Absolutely not. But do I embrace it? Yeah, I do.
Yeah, the thing that so if I didn't have the parents I had, I wouldn't be the man I am today. You mentioned you brought it up twice. The dad. What's the term you use? Dad. It's a
dad deprivation.
Dad deprivation. You mentioned it twice, and I've never heard that before. I don't know if that's your phrase, but it's
no,
fantastic.
I'll give. There's this book out called The Boy Crisis, and this guy named Warren Farrell. And a co-author is John Gray. John Gray wrote Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus. So he's written a number of books, but Warren Farrell is the guy. And he's shining a pretty bright light on this. He's trying to create. There's no White House council on helping men, even though I quoted all those statistics to you about, the death. I mean, the death rate is twice as high for men now than it is for women. Yeah. And those are the highest numbers since World War II. Wow. And so we really, I think we need to wake up. So he's trying to create this White House Council for Awareness. And what does that mean? I mean, we've got programs for women and for disabilities and for different assets in society, or different people and different roles in society. And I think that's all great. I have nothing against that. I just think we've got a problem. And the more we have men in leadership today, we need it more than ever to help society. The biggest feedback I get is from women on that. I put out a post on Facebook, and it's probably 9 months ago, about beginning my virtual dad, and probably 80% were from women. And either they were single moms, or they had been in a bad relationship, or they're struggling, and they're mystified by it, and they're trying to figure out how to get help as well.
Yeah. I've heard a number of men who have, and women actually, there's a few women that I can think of that have podcasts that center around men's development and men's work. And they've mentioned a number of times that anytime they ask questions or anytime they get comments on posts, whether it's Instagram, Facebook, or wherever, even a majority of them come from women. And I think one of the big reasons for that is we're too close to, it's like the master who's too close to his work. Men are too close to themselves to often see what the problem is. But it's manifesting in the world around us through, this like whole idea of toxic masculinity. It's just like you said, this whole, the boy, it's like an epidemic of boys. It's, boys who never grew up. And, but to see it for what it is, which is just boys not turning into productive, generative, positive men is the first step. This dad deprivation that you mentioned, though, I find that so interesting because when people think about their father, if they had a father in their life. Dad deprivation, I'm just guessing, probably just isn't just a boy who grew up without a father, or a boy who grew up without, or with a father who was violent or what have you. It could just as equally, like you mentioned, your stepdad was a father, but not necessarily a strong father figure. So there's probably a spectrum of boys who grew up into men who didn't get what they needed from that relationship. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
And it can come in many forms. I mean, silent fathers, silent but loving fathers who provide and don't do much more than that. And I'm not bashing fathers. I mean, here's the reality: I love my boys to the best of my ability. I've wounded them as well, right? I mean, the big point is none of us are perfect, even if we're intentional about it. But I think there's a generation of pretty silent fathers. And then with the divorce rate at 40 to 50%, it seems to have been in that range for many, many, many years. That leads to dad deprivation. And then there's some studies that say, 2/3 of the other marriages that are still going on, they're just going through the motions. They're, it's more of a comfort than intentionality. So, and I think that's where the toxic masculinity comes from, is not having a good guide, not having a strong role model around and somebody that you trust and know.
Yeah, definitely. The idea of not getting it right. You mentioned you're in a position where you're probably in the top 1% of guys who are capable of raising men, because you realize the importance of these pieces that go into becoming a man from a boy. But you said yourself that you don't get it perfect, and I think that's such a worthwhile thing to comment on, is that nobody gets this perfect. Probably even when we, 10,000 years ago, prehistory, when we had all these rites of passage, when we had everything, right, quote unquote, we were getting it all right. We were still getting some things wrong, but that, these subtle nuances of, the wounding, like you say, that's that wound when the boy gets it, that wound when the adolescent gets it. If used correctly, like you've done so in your life, it can be the first steps on that hero's journey. That boy learns from that wound, turns it into an act of service when he comes back around, so long as he takes that step and has the mentorships and the guides along the way. It's probably part of the whole process of building, a rich, dynamic community. Is you need these small imperfections in, that father-son relationship in order to, progress the societies. Yeah,
I mean, that's one theory that guys like Warren Farrell and John Eldridge, and I listen to this other guy, Dr. Anthony Bradley. He teaches about masculinity at a faith-based university, but they talk about, one of the reasons there's, like many men will become CEOs, they have a chip on their shoulder because of that dad deprivation.
Yeah.
Hey, I'm going to show you, right? You didn't think I could do it, and I'm going to do it. I mean, I'm sure a number of your clients, like, hey, I'm going to, was it Jack LaLanne and some of the old 40s and 50s, 1940s and 1950s, kicking sand and, and okay, I'm gonna start lifting weights and I'm gonna become strong and powerful. That's a hero's journey along the way of trying to show that you're worthy and you're capable, right?
Definitely. The thing that comes up for me, when, especially with lifting weights, because that's something that's fairly close to me, is when it comes to men, and I'm sure that you've encountered this too. Often, I'll use the example of bodybuilding. From the outset, it looks like, I'm just trying to improve my health, or I'm trying to, become more physically fit and physically attractive. But if you go layers deep, it's often a way either to protect yourself or to distract yourself, and even more often is both. And this shows up, that's bodybuilding, right? But it can also show up in career, like the CEO, for instance, that example. It's a way to prove, it might be a way to prove, your father wrong about you, but it also might be a way to put all of your attention into your career, because to put yourself into your relationship with your wife or with your kids or whatever it is painful because of that wounding of your own childhood or your own family upbringing. So it's like this, it's this 1-2 thing. And as you mentioned earlier, if you're not careful about rounding those parts of your life out, you can get to the end of your life looking back going, my goodness, I've spent far too much time in this one area of my life at the detriment of all these other parts of my life that would have brought so much more joy had I, not neglected them.
Right, and that's the beauty of your goal wheel and how you're trying to first raise awareness to those things, and then I think the second part is to bring intentionality to those. What's kind of a plan, right? And I mean, that's with my virtual dad. I kind of break it into 2 steps. One is let's deal with the past, but I don't want to park there. Let's just acknowledge we've all got challenges. We're all broken. We're all wounded at some level. And I was ashamed. I thought I was the only guy until I was a little over 40 years old, and I went to a retreat, a business retreat, and we were doing introductions. There was 18 men in this cabin in the hills of California, and we're all telling a quick little bit of our story. And, the moderator, his name was Vance Caesar, wonderful, wonderful leader and teacher, and he said, how many of you have been affected by alcohol negatively in your family? And it was like 80% of the guys that raised their hand. And as silly as that sounds, Taylor, I thought I was alone. I thought I was the only dude. So step number 1 is to know you're not alone. Everybody's got this stuff. And then 2, realize you're going to have challenges, and to embrace them. Every day's a battle. I mean, that's part of life, the battle of life. So we go through that acknowledgement of the past. And then I start on I call it just practical. How can you, again, it's the Barnes & Noble, Amazon, logging on. I want to get better. Where do I start? So we talk about, how to prioritize your life and think of something bigger than yourself. I call that one faith. And then how do you run your family? And then your finances, and just real practical things that are tangible that they can grab a hold of and say, you know what? I can start working forward in some of these areas. And I don't just want to talk about how I was a victim when I was younger. Yeah. We're all victims at some level. And I'm very, very, very tender to everybody's story. I don't want to diminish that at all, but we need to have some practical steps forward as well. Like, what can I do to start working on that now, to get better for me and my family?
Yeah, well, something that whole process that you just mentioned, the acknowledging the pain, acknowledging the past, and then moving on from there. You mentioned that was a big part of your own story, that hero's journey, what wounded you and what was could have been a weakness, you've turned into a strength. That reminds me of a quote that I can't remember exactly, but you shared with me. It wasn't Marcus. Was it Marcus Aurelius? You'll have to remind me. Oh,
the one I sent to you before this?
Yeah, you mentioned it was basically like taking on each day. I can't remember exactly how it goes though.
Yeah, I mean, Marcus Aurelius, yeah, so he's for those of you who don't know Marcus Aurelius, he was essentially like the president of the United States. He was literally the most powerful man in the world in the Roman Empire. He was a benevolent dictator, if you will. He wrote this journal, and he didn't intend it to be published. It's called Meditations, and he wrote all of his thoughts about how he wanted to be a better man, even though he was the most powerful man in the world, which fascinates me, the fact that he had this mindset of wanting to continue to grow, and he's a fascinating guy. But he said, begin each day by telling yourself, today I shall meet with interference, ingratitude, insolence, disloyalty, ill will, and selfishness. All of them due to the offender's ignorance of what is good or what is evil. And again, that's all of us. I mean, we're but you just knowing you're going to get out of bed, and that there's going to be some adversity. At least you don't have this myth of life's supposed to be perfect. And I think that's the way it is today. Back in my generation, I'll call it my generation, in the 70s, when things were taboo, I thought I was the only family that had an alcoholic father. And again, it cracks me up to think of that now, but back then I thought that was the case because nobody talked about it. So I compared my imperfect life to this myth of everybody else's perfect life. Today, we've got social media, and it's the opposite. We compare our imperfect life to what we perceive as, now we see it. We see everybody's perfection on social media. Their vacations, their good times, their kids, their puppies, whatever, right? So now we've got too much information to compare ourselves against. And just knowing that, hey, every day is going to be a battle. Actually, Seneca is the one that said it, vivere militare est, is to live is to fight. If you're fighting, if you want a good life, you're going to have to fight. Actually, I got it tattooed right here.
Oh, nice.
So
I love that.
Yeah, every morning I had, on this one, I have all glory to God and a heartbeat. My 18-year-old son 4 years ago almost died of heart failure. I loaded him onto a Flight for Life helicopter, and I thought I'd never see him again. And so he lived. He's doing great. He's thriving in college. That's his hero's journey. He wants to give back to that community that saved his life. He's on a passionate pursuit there. But every morning in the shower, when I'll wash my left arm first, and I'll say, "Hey, I'm grateful. I'm grateful for this day and everything I have." And then I wash the right arm, and I think, and it's going to be a battle out there today. And it does. It snaps me into the mindset of getting after it in the day.
I love that. That reminds me of, I think if you want to create that life for yourself, if you want to take power over, the things that you can have power over, which is funny because we were just talking about stoicism just a moment ago, which is all about accepting the fact that you're essentially powerless, outside of the emotional reaction that you have to things. But if you do want to take power, it is a daily fight, like you say. I often think about, if you ever look in a neglected neighborhood or like a ghost town or something, how quickly nature takes it over. And I feel that that's very similar in life to the creations that you have. The things that you work on, whether it's your career or your family, your friendships, your body, your health. It's just like building a house or a community. The second you start to neglect it, it will show itself. Grass will start coming up through the cracks, or the buildings will start to become decrepit and whatnot. It takes daily upkeep. It takes daily attention and intention in order to keep these things not only where they are today, but to progress it day after day, week after week into the vision that you have for yourself.
Yeah, I could. It's just intentionality, like you said. Yeah. I mean, that's another way of saying what you just said is being intentional and having, being active in each of those areas. And I think my biggest weakness when I was younger is if I got into a tight spot, if I didn't know what to do, I wouldn't necessarily act out and get violent or anything, because I would never do that because of what I grew up with. But I would get passive, which is equally as damaging. So if you needed to be a man of action at some time, you're talking about ghost towns and neighborhoods that are decrepit, but if I got into a situation that I didn't know what to do, Taylor, I'd get passive. And I would just kind of put my head down and hope the whole storm rolled over. Yeah. And that is not the best way for a man or any person, frankly, to respond to a situation. How can you, how can you get through it? You got to figure out. You got to be creative. You got to be resourceful. You just got to be active. Is what you need to do. And I can name time after time. When I proposed to my wife, we were talking about it. We'd been dating, and I knew she was the girl for me. I loved her, and we're together 25 plus years later. But in that moment, when she said, "Do you want to get married?" I flinched. And here's what I did, Taylor. I didn't know if I could measure up. I didn't know if I would screw it up. And so she's thinking it's her because I didn't rush in and say, kind of the Hollywood, Disney, whatever metaphor, make it magical. I flinched and I got passive, and I didn't delay long. It was a couple of weeks, but I was going through a lot of thought process right there in that moment. She was thinking, okay, he just doesn't think I'm the one. And I really hurt her deeply in that moment. And of course, there's no way I meant to do that, but I did. And that's the reality of it. And which leads to now my passion project, right? Because it's still, she's forgiven me. We laugh about it. It's part of our story. I did the world's worst proposal. I could tell you about that, and I won't right now.
Yeah.
I did a lot of things just because I did, I just flinched and I stopped, and I should have leaned in at a critical moment, and I didn't. And so that's where I think we need to be men of action. And that's why I teach some of those action steps so that men can start taking some steps forward immediately instead of saying, I'm just going to get crushed by debt for another year. I'm not going to take care of my body for another year and, have more symptoms of, chronic ailments, crop up. And those are the things that you're really great about helping men with, right? And women.
Yeah. It's interesting. So you said, I can't remember exactly how you said it, but you doubted yourself essentially in that moment. And just previous to that too, that first retreat you went to, you felt like you were the only one who dealt with alcoholism in your family. And I feel like a lot of men, even today, even though we have, the access to information that we do, still feel, like they're not capable, or that they're the only ones going through it, or that this is unique to them and that there really is no way out of it outside of them just figuring it out. To men who might be listening to this right now and might be feeling that way, what would you suggest that the questions they start asking themselves, the change in framing of the things that they're facing right now, and then ultimately too, this is something that you help with. How can they begin this process? Whether it's through your boot camp or just reaching out to you through email or DM or however you prefer.
I think men along, and that's the second module. I call it Know Your Story, and I learned this from another author that I really enjoy, Daniel Pink, who wrote "To Sell Is to Human" and When, WHEN, like how to enhance productivity and like doing certain critical tasks at certain times of the day when you're alert and not. So he's just a fascinating storyteller, but he taught this, he calls it the Pixar storytelling method. And it's really the formula for all the Pixar movies. And in one of the modules we talk, it's called Know Your Story. And it's really based on like Stephen Pressfield's The Hero's Journey. Let's start writing down and articulating. So when we look in the mirror, and again, I'll give you another example. Early in my career, I got a degree in physics. I had wonderful high school physics teachers. My step-grandfather built satellites that circumvented the globe and went to Mars. So I thought I'd be a great physicist. I wasn't. And then I became a software engineer. I was a worse software engineer than I was a physicist. And then I decided to get my MBA, and I got into business. So I've been in sales. But for like that first 5 years, I'm like, I'm an idiot. I can't figure out my career. And I had all this negative self-talk. But really, I was on a journey. And now I've reframed it to the Thomas Edison kind of thing. Hey, I made a bunch of mistakes. I know how not to do it now. But, you got to get rid of that negative self-talk And so to know your story and to be able to tell it, and we use the Pixar method of, and mine is, hey, I grew up in a home, with alcoholism and domestic violence. And then one day, and you can read Pixar movie after Pixar movie, and this is the formula. So we apply that to our lives. One day I heard Lou Holtz say, and because of that, I sought out mentors, and because of that, I started developing curriculum until then one day. So there's this, and we can create that story for ourselves, because I believe we're each a story. And for a while I was writing down my story, and it's not about me. It's about everybody else's story. That's what I want to impart on men. The last thing a man should be really concerned about is Jay Millar and my story. But that's why I read biographies. I love reading biographies. I don't know if you've read Educated by Tara Westover.
I don't think
it's
so.
It's her story.
No.
She grew up it was on the New York Times bestseller list for 5 years. It probably still is there. She grew up in Idaho and didn't get an education. Her family took her kind of off grid, if you will, and she didn't even begin school till 16.
Oh, wow.
And I'm not going to tell you the story. J.D. Vance's Hillbilly Elegy, I don't know if you've read that one. It's now a Netflix movie. He grew up in northern Kentucky, southern Ohio, industrial towns, automotive industries, but then those evaporated with outsourcing and moving factories. But there's a lot of opioid crises, and his father wasn't around. His mother was addicted to some things, and a series of boyfriend after boyfriend after boyfriend. His story is very similar to mine. He's a much better storyteller, but he joined the military. He's now a lawyer somewhere. But I like to listen to other people's stories, because I don't take their story and make it mine, but I borrow some of the words and I say, man, that's like me. And so you talk about vulnerability. You can do a lot of it reading some of these, the stories of other people's lives. And then you go, oh, now that makes me feel like not such an idiot. Everybody else is going through that. And, I'm kind of like that. So you put better words. It took me a long, long time to figure that out. And that's why I try to help teach men to really compress that time. It shouldn't take you a decade to be able to tell your hero's journey. Let's work on it for a couple of months. And then every morning when you're shaving, looking in the mirror, brushing your teeth, you're like, you know what? I'm on this journey and I'm a powerful man. And I'm going to take care of my family. I'm going to provide. I'm going to take care of my body. I'm going to be a good citizen and contribute to something larger than me. Rather than I'm a loser and I couldn't figure it out, which I think is what 80% of guys do. I really do.
Yeah. Yeah, and I love the fact that you said it doesn't have to take forever. Again, that book, From Boys to Men, another thing that jumped out just now as he said that was in that book he said, you think about adolescence, and we draw adolescence out. We basically, from the time a kid turns 12, it's like, they're more of a nuisance than anything. That's the way that we treat them, and they have no real place in society other than just to go to school and and fight the system. But back, prehistory, when we had these rites of passage, this is in reference to the book, they mention these prehistoric societies realized how drawn out adolescence is awful. It sucks. Nobody wants to go through that. Not the kids, and definitely not the community. So they tried to make it as quick as possible. This whole transition from boy to man took place in a very short amount of time. And the reason why I bring that up is because you said, this does not have to be a drawn out process. You really just have to make the decision. You have to, take a look at what's going on for you right now, acknowledge the past, and then decide what do I want for my future? What do I want to bring to the world? And what do I want to transform in myself? And that sounds like that is a process that you help with. It's just simply making the decision to seek out mentorship, to seek out guidance, and continue down the path.
Absolutely. And I think along with that, I call it grace and truth. And grace means, we're going to go easy on each other. We're going to let each other off the mat when we confess that we've made mistakes and that we've fallen short, because we all do. And I've found, a lot of guys who are filled with grace in their friendships. And I think you've probably heard the same, you're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with, right? Yeah. So we talk about friends as well. Make sure you're around good people who will speak truth in your life. And if it's from a friend, wounds from a friend can be trusted. If somebody, if somebody that's close to you is saying, hey, you know what, you're in danger, you're going toward a cliff.
Yeah.
That's really a friend. That's not a foe. Now, if somebody that works at, the local supermarket and you're checking out is giving you advice, that's not a friend, right? They're not close enough to know you to be able to speak into your life.
Yeah.
But you got to have friends around you that can be trusted, but you do have to have grace and truth. You have to have somebody that can grab you by the collar and say, whoa, you're getting too far down the path, buddy. And you've got to be strong enough yourself if you see another person walking down that path that's a friend of yours and say, man, I'm worried about you and I love you and I care for you and I want what's best for you. And if people know you're coming at it from that point of view, they typically respond, right? And not with anger, but with like, hey, thanks. Maybe not in the moment, but ultimately they respond with gratitude.
Yeah. Yeah, and hindsight's 2020. It might be uncomfortable in the moment, but a week, maybe even less from the time that you bring that up or they bring it up with you, realize, hey, thanks for saving me from falling off that cliff, or vice versa.
Well, and Taylor, you said about the guy with the expensive car, right? All men need this. It's the iron sharpens iron, and that's why we need to be really intentional about our relationships with other men and figure out ways to really get to know each other rather than just pretending like I got it all figured out, because that's not going to help you or anybody else. Yeah.
So we live in an interesting time right now because, we're conducting this coffee shop meeting, over the internet, and you created myvirtualdad.net because of what happened with the pandemic. You were forced to do your meetings with other men virtually, but that's been, as you said, a blessing in disguise, because it's created this whole new way for you to not only connect with men in your community, but connect with men pretty much anywhere there's an internet connection. You mentioned a 90-day boot camp. What does that look like, and who is it right for?
It's a really good question. Like I said, this is my passion project. I have my day job, but I do spend most of my time working on this on weekends and in evenings, with the approval of my wife. She understands that this means a lot to me, and she's very supportive, and she's actually very helpful in it as well. But I'm creating a package. It's kind of a quick start package. I think the real sweet spot is for like guys that are about to get married. Just got a puppy a week ago, and it struck me. We spend more training our dogs than we do ourselves, right? We really do.
Yeah.
And that's a shame. So I think it's really, really good for men who are embarking on or are about to get married, and I really promote a future married couple going through a structured pre-marriage class, just again to get a lot of these issues on the table and to begin to talk about them and make sure that there's no real big hidden gotchas. But a man, I think, needs to go, maybe it goes back to your labyrinth, a man needs to go on a journey and make sure that he's doing what he needs to do in order to be a successful husband, father, and provider. Because men, they don't want to appear weak. They don't. I mean, it's societal. We don't want to appear weak. And if we don't know what to do, we can either get violent or we can get passive like I did. And, we just need a little bit of direction to get down the path. So we start, so I've got a 90-day boot camp and a 1-month boot camp that I'm going to be offering at the end of the summer. And that's more for guys getting ready to get married. Say, hey, here's how you can make sure that you're getting off on the 4 most important things. So it's a 4-week class. The 90-day boot camp, we delve more into the past and acknowledge the past. And then we go into practical things about, faith, family, fitness, finances, friends. I didn't mean to make them all F's, but they happen to all start with the letter F. And then very last module is, okay, now what does this mean? It's a call to action. You used to not know what to do, and now you know too much to do. They can be equally paralyzing. So we have, we end it with like, hey, what are the 2 or 3 things that you're going to start with now? Because it is a journey. You're not going to fix everything in one day. You're going to build your health and wellness brick by brick. You're going to learn new things, new techniques. You're going to talk about breathing. You're going to talk about sleeping. You're going to talk about eating. You're going to talk about, lifting, all those things. But you're not going to do that in one day, right? I think you talked about this on your podcast with, what was his name? Leo.
Oh yeah, Leo. Yeah.
Yeah, the cognitive behavioral therapy stuff,
yeah.
and just sometimes putting on your exercise clothes. I think you mentioned it. You don't want to. Your goal is to work out 90 minutes a day or something, but you're not going to do that on day one, right?
Yeah.
Right. So it's the same. It's the same feel, right? So, but I'm finding older men who are dealing with some wounds, and I went into a period where I medicated with alcohol for a while too, right? And I had a loving wife, but there was things that would trigger me to feel unworthy, and I just kind of get quiet, a little bit moody, and I'd have a couple glasses of wine, right? That's not the answer either. So I'm finding older men are really looking at the past is helpful for older guys and younger guys as well. But pre-marriage, I think, is a real good place. You're getting ready to have a family, start a family. I think that's a great, real sweet spot for these classes, because men are hungry and they're really contemplative about how am I going to do this?
Yeah.
What's my plan?
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. And I feel just intuitively a lot of men, probably like yourself, you mentioned when the opportunity came up for you to propose or to for the idea of marriage came into life, you self-doubted. You had self-doubt, you second-guess yourself. And I feel like probably a lot of men feel that way, especially going into marriage, if they haven't created that solid foundation for themselves of stepping into their masculinity, stepping into their sense of what they're offering to the world as a man. And if they can do that in this process with you, before they kick off on this journey of marriage with someone that they care about, bringing the entirety of themselves to that relationship, I can't think of a better thing to invest themselves in.
I think it's all the things we don't learn in school either, right? That we do need to learn from somebody outside of school, like a father.
Yeah, definitely.
And we need just to be intentional about it. If that's what we hope is not a strategy, right?
Yeah,
you got to have a bit of a plan. So again, this is not the end all be all. There's so many people that can help other men in this world, but this is just kind of packaged in. If I'm in the mindset of getting ready to start my family or my career, and I've helped so many people get jobs just through interviewing skills. They're like, hey, what do I do? I don't even know how to go about a job interview. And I know there's a bunch of assets out there on the internet, so you can prepare for those things. But we just walked through. I've got a module on that, and I think I'm like 30 for 30 on people interviewing and getting jobs. So
amazing.
Those are the tactical things that can help build the snowball of confidence, for the future.
Definitely, I love it. Well, Jay, a question I like to ask everybody. And it's different depending on who they are. A lot of people that I've interviewed are, I guess, what you call like influencers, right? They have a whole bunch of, so they, like you mentioned earlier, we see this highlight reel of people, right? And they're often understood one way when there's a certain way that they'd prefer to be understood, or they really wish that more people knew about them. For you, you've had all of these amazing conversations with men over the last 20 years of you doing men's work, and learned so much about yourself and so much about other men and the common issues that we face. And then there's the world outside of that, that environment that you have. What do you wish more people knew about you, or what do you wish that you could get across to the world that is a deeper sense of you that is maybe misunderstood or not seen correctly?
I actually think we've covered a lot of that, and I'll answer it in a different way. And I think most men are like this. And I do, like I said, I've enjoyed your podcast, listening to Jordan Drains and Leo. Leo Venus. Yeah. I mean, those are influencers. They're out there. They're professionals. They're doctors. They're doing amazing stuff. I'm kind of coming at it from the other angle, but I think all of us, Taylor, have. I call it. Envision a pie chart, and think of 90% of you is really what the world sees, right? I told you I flinched when I was. Getting ready to propose to my wife. I told you I medicated, if I felt unworthy at times, right? There were certain triggers, there were certain things that would make me feel that way. And I've told you I couldn't even put on a jock strap, right? So I've shared with you what I call the 10%. And before I started coming public with this over the past, year or so, the world thought Jay had a easy, everything was coming easy, career was going well, family's great, tight, they love each other, they care about each other, everything is good, and I guess that's what I'd like the world to know, not only about me, but about themselves, right? We all have that 10% that really, a lot of that is the fuel that drives us. That's kind of our hero's journey. And until we can articulate that, it can actually become the 90% that's ugly. And at the most critical moments, that 10% of all that woundedness comes out sideways and wrong. And mostly on the people that are closest to you and that you love most, right? So, I mean, I've actually shared with you the things that, and I'm getting better and I'm more vulnerable. And I do it only to set the example because everybody's got their own story. But life isn't easy, and I really like you mentioning that person stepping out of the expensive car with the expensive suit with the trophy date or wife or whatever, right? That's so fictitious, and we've all got to face the day every day, as powerfully and as confidently as we can, and we're not going to get it right. So when we mess up, go easy on yourself. And just get up again and try again, and it's gonna get better.
I love that. Well said. Well, Jay, I appreciate you. You shared a wealth of wisdom today, and the work that you're doing, I think, is so important. It's always been important, but it's never been more important. And I just really hope that the men listening to this and women who know men who could benefit from reaching out to you do. So if they wanted to, where do they find you? How can they contact you?
Yeah, it's really straightforward. You already mentioned it. Thank you, Taylor. It's myvirtualdad.net and jay@myvirtualdad.net is how you can get a hold of me. So awesome. We're building. Things are coming into place. I appreciate you having a conversation with me early. I mean, my goal is to be back with you here in a couple of years and be one of those influencers, and that's where my heart is. I mean, I turn it over to the karma of the universe. If it seems to be growing, the tribe seems to be growing pretty rapidly, but we'll see where it ends. But I'm really excited about it and really happy to help other men.
Well, I'd argue that you already are more of an influencer than most of these, quote unquote influencers, because you think about the last 20 years of your work with, in men's work, the conversations that you've had. You mentioned, it was your nephew, right? And how that circle grew. Maybe historically it hasn't been influencing on a digital platform, but the influence you've had over those 20 years and with the men that you've had conversations with, I'd argue are wildly more impactful than your everyday run-of-the-mill influencer who's telling you what type of juice they drink or that sort of thing. So I appreciate you for that.
I humbly accept that compliment. Thank you very much.
Awesome, Jay. Well, I appreciate you being on the show, and I look forward to seeing all the amazing connections that you create in the future.
And likewise, Taylor, I appreciate what you do, and I appreciate your heart and how you're trying to help others. So again, best of luck to you and in your endeavors.
Thank you. Thank you again for checking out this episode of the Power Plant Body Podcast. If you enjoyed it, I'd be grateful if you left it a rating and review on iTunes. When you leave a rating and review, it really helps because it lets iTunes know, and they'll be more likely to promote it to others who could also benefit from hearing these conversations. Feel free to share this episode with people who could also benefit from Jay and his insights into men's self-development. You can find Jay by going to myvirtualdad.net. That's myvirtualdad.net, N-E-T. Jay also created a special offer just for listeners of this show. I've added a link to that page in the show notes for this episode, so you can find it by going to powerplantbody.com/J-Millar. That's JAY-MILLAR. Don't forget to head over to powerplantbody.com/free-tools to get your hands on a free copy of the Goal Wheel PDF, along with tons of other free tools. I'm regularly adding new resources to that page to help you create the best version of yourself, so you'll definitely want to bookmark it. You can find me on Instagram @TheVeganTrainer, and feel free to send me a DM if you have any questions or suggestions for future episodes. Thanks again for spending some time with Jay and I today, and I'll see you in the next episode.